Well, today I'm going to talk about Poor Economics, which is written by Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, recipients of the Nobel Prize for Economics in the year 2018. So, what interested me is when I read the foreword in that it was written, when Esther was 6, she read a comic book on Mother Teresa about the city called Calcutta, which was so crowded that each person had only 10 square feet to live in. She had a vision of a vast checkerboard of a city with 3 feet by 3 feet marked out on ground, with a human pawn, as it were, huddled into it. And when she finally visited Calcutta, she was 24 and a graduate student of MIT. Looking out of the taxi on her way to the city, she felt vaguely disappointed. Everywhere she looked, there was empty space, trees, patches of grass, empty sidewalks. Where was all the misery so vividly depicted in the comic book? What had happened? Where had all the people gone? So, at 6, Abhijit knew where the people lived. They lived in little ramshackle houses behind his house in Calcutta. Their children always seemed to have lots of time to play, and they could beat him at any sport. When he went down to play marbles with them, the marbles would always end up in the pockets of their ragged shorts. He was jealous. This urge to reduce the poor to a set of cliches has been with us for as long as there has been poverty. The poor appear in social theory as much as in literature, by turns lazy or enterprising, noble or thievish, angry or passive, helpless or self-sufficient. It is no surprise that the policy stances that correspond to these views of the poor should also tend to be captured in simple formulas: free markets for the poor, make human rights substantial, deal with conflict first, give more money to the poorest, foreign aid kills development, and the like. Of course, all these ideas have important elements of truth, but they rarely have much space for average poor women or men with their hopes and doubts, limitations and aspirations, beliefs and confusion. If the poor appear at all, it is usually as the dramatis personae of some uplifting anecdote or tragic episode, or to be admired or pitied, but not as a source of knowledge, not as people to be consulted about when they think what they think or want to do. So this is very interesting as we see, and they have talked about this S-curve also, the S-shaped curve and the poverty trap, which is so important. You must get the book to read it, to actually go through it, and I'm not going to give the spoilers away. Otherwise you're not going to read the book. Just enjoy the book. There's so much to do. So, we have what is another thing that sort of interested me was that we're talking about 1 billion hungry people. For many of us in the West, they write, poverty is almost synonymous with hunger. Other than major natural catastrophes such as the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004 or the Haiti earthquake in 2010, no single event affecting the world's poor has captured the public imagination and prompted collective generosity as much as Ethiopian famine of the early 1980s and the resulting We Are the World concert in March 1985. More recently, the announcement by the UN Food and Agricultural Organization in June 2009 that more than 1 billion people are suffering from hunger grabbed the headlines in a way that the World Bank's estimate of the number of people living under $1 a day never did. So this association of poverty and hunger is institutionalized in the UN's first Millennium Development Goal, MDG. So what is MDG? Millennium Development Goal, which is to reduce poverty and hunger. Indeed, poverty lines in many countries were originally set to capture the notions of poverty based on hunger. The budget needed to buy a certain number of calories plus some other indispensable purchases such as housing. A poor person was essentially defined as someone without enough to eat. It is no surprise, therefore, that a large part of the government's efforts to help the poor is posited on the idea that the poor desperately need food and that the quantity is what matters. Food subsidies are ubiquitous in the Middle East. Egypt spent, they're talking about how much each country spent on this. So, talking about India, in India, for example, the poor are entitled to 55 pounds of rice a month at about 4 rupees per pound, less than 20% of the market price, say in Orissa. Currently, the Indian Parliament is debating instituting a Right to Food Act, which would allow people to sue the government if they are starving. The delivery of food aid on a massive scale is a logistical nightmare. In India, it is estimated that more than one half of the wheat and over one third of the rice gets lost along the way, including a good fraction that gets eaten by rats. If government insists on such policy despite the waste, it is not only because hunger and poverty are assumed to go hand in hand. The inability of the poor to feed themselves properly is also one of the most frequently cited root causes of poverty trap. The institution is powerful. The poor cannot afford to eat enough. This makes them less productive and keeps them poor. So, Park Solhen, who lives in a small village in province of Bandung, Indonesia, once explained to us exactly how such a poverty trap worked. His parents used to have a bit of land, but they also had 13 children and had to build so many houses for each of them and their families that there was no land left for cultivation. Park Solhen had been working as a casual agricultural worker, which paid him up to 10,000 rupiah per day, that is $2, a US dollar that is, purchasing power parity, for work in the field. However, a recent hike in fertilizers and fuel price had forced farmers to economize. According to Park Solhen, the local farmers decided not to cut wages but to stop hiring workers instead. Park Solhen became unemployed most of the time. In the 2 months before we met him in 2008, he had not found a single day of agricultural labor. Younger people in this situation could normally find work as construction workers, but he explained he was too weak for the most physical work too. So, the very poor earn less than they need to be able to do significant work, but those who have enough to eat can do serious agricultural work. This creates a poverty trap. The poor get poorer and the rich get richer and eat even better and get stronger and even richer, and the gap keeps on increasing. Although Park Solhen's logical explanation of how someone might get trapped in starvation was impeccable, there was something vaguely troubling about his narrative. We met him not in war-infested Sudan or in a flooded area of Bangladesh, but in a village in prosperous Java, where even after the increase in food prices in 2007 and 8, there was clearly plenty of food available and a basic meal did not cost much. He was clearly not eating enough when we met him, but he was eating enough to survive. Why would it not pay someone to offer him the extra bit of nutrition that would make him productive in return for a full day's work? More generally, although a hunger-based poverty trap is certainly a logical possibility, how relevant is it in practice for most people today? So, as you see, you find this is so interesting, and it is a book which is written very lucidly, and the table of contents, they are part 1 and part 2. So in the chapters, first chapter is Think Again and Again, Trapped in Poverty. Part 1 is Private Lives. Chapter 2 is Billion Hungry People. Then again in this they talk about, are there really a billion hungry people? Are the poor really eating well and eating enough? Why do the poor eat so little? So is there really a nutrition-based poverty trap? Chapter 3, How Hanging Fruit for Better Health, Better Global Health. Then the health trap. Why aren't these technologies used more? Then Understanding Health-Seeking Behavior, The View from Our Couch. Chapter 4, Top of the Class, Supply-Demand Wars, The Curse of Expectations, Why Schools Fail, Re-engineering Education. Chapter 5, Park Sudarno's Big Family, What is Wrong with Large Families? Do the poor control their fertility decisions? Children as Financial Instruments, the Family. Part 2 is Institutions. Chapter 6, Barefoot Hedge Fund Managers, The Hazards of Being Poor, The Hedge, Where are the insurance companies for the poor? Chapter 7, The Men from Kabul and Ranches of India, and Not So Simple, Lending to the Poor. So if you find, then you have also something as micro insights for a macro program. Does the microcredit work? The limits of microcredit. How can larger farms be financed? Chapter 8 is Saving Brick by Brick. Why the poor don't save more. The psychology of savings, poverty and the logic of self-control. Chapter 9 is Reluctant Entrepreneurs. Capitalists without capital, the business of the poor, good jobs. Then you have Chapter 10, Policies, Politics. Then you have Political Economy. You have Changes at the Margin. You have Decentralization and Democracy in Practice. And then you have Against Political Economy. And then in place of a sweeping conclusion, we have acknowledgement notes, index and copyright page. And this book has been dedicated to their mothers, Nirmala Banerjee and Violaine Duflo. So it's a good read by Abhijit Banerjee and his wife, that is Esther Duflo.